Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the Community Forum. We'll get started in just a few minutes.
Bienvenidos a todos. Vamos a empezar en unos minutos.
Welcome, everyone who's just joined us. We'll be getting started in just a few minutes. Okay, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the first session of the LANI Virtual Community Forum for 2022. My name is Francie Levine Grader. I am LANI's Director of Development and Marketing, and with me is my colleague, Jose Alvarez, LANI Program Manager, and we're delighted to have all of you with us this afternoon. First thing, I would like to thank our sponsors of today's session. Next slide, please, Jose. We have received funding through the Community Partnering Program of the Metropolitan Water District of Southern California, and we are very grateful. In addition, we have support from two LANI board members, Emily Gable-Letty, who's a landscaped architect, and Irene Ibranosian of Chief Strategies, and we're really grateful to have all of these partners and their generous support that makes today's session possible. Next slide, please. We're offering today, you can see the session, the flow of our program for today. I want to start by having interpretation instructions. We'll be offering interpretation in Spanish and English. I'm going to give the instructions in English, and then I will be introducing our interpreter for today, Gabriela Tavili, to give them in Spanish. One of our panelists today will be making her presentation in Spanish, so everyone please do click the interpretation button at the bottom of your screen, which will be turned on in just a moment, and you need to choose the language that you wish to hear. If you are joining via the Zoom smartphone app, select your language by clicking More or the three dots at the bottom right corner of your screen, select Language Interpretation, and then choose Spanish or English and click Done. If you wish to hear only the interpreter, well, no, you shouldn't do that. Everyone needs to click Spanish or English, and you can mute original audio as well. So just to reiterate, everyone must choose a language. Please do not stay in the default off because then you will not hear the full program. And these instructions are also going to be put in the chat box for anyone who would like to refer to them that way as well. Gabriela, can you give instructions in Spanish, please?
Of course. Estamos ofreciendo interpretación en vivo en inglés y español durante esta reunión. Si desea escuchar la interpretación en español, haga clic en el botón de Interpretation, que es interpretación. Está en la parte inferior derecha de la pantalla Zoom. Va a haber un icono del globo terráqueo. Ahí le va a dar clic. Si está usted uniéndose a través de la aplicación Zoom por su smartphone, entonces seleccione su idioma haciendo clic en More o Más, que son los tres puntitos en la esquina inferior derecha de la pantalla, y va a seleccionar Language Interpretation, interpretación del idioma. Luego elija Spanish y haga clic en Done. Listo. Si desea usted escuchar solamente al intérprete y no a los oradores originales, asegúrese de hacerle clic en Mute Original Audio, silenciar audio original. Todos deben de elegir un idioma. No se quede en la posición de apagado predeterminado. Elija un idioma, por favor. Gracias. Thank you, Francis.
Thank you. Okay, I'm going to turn on the interpretation option now. So please, before we go further, go ahead and click your preferred language, and you can also mute original audio to get that a little bit more clearly. Okay. While you're doing that, I'm going to also ask that if you'd like to, you can please put your name and your organization, if it's applicable, in the chat box, and that way everyone can know who's here today. And to ask you that if you'd like to submit a question at any time during the session, go ahead and put that in the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen, and we will be getting to questions at the end of the panelist presentations, and hopefully we'll be able to get to as many as possible. Okay, so one more item before I introduce our moderator for today. I'm going to put up a quick poll because we'd like to know how you came to us today. Want to make sure that we're using our resources wisely. So if you could just take a moment and let us know, and if it's more than one answer, that's also fine. So feel free to click as many as is applicable. I'll give that just one more second. While that's going, I see a few more people have joined us. So if you came in a few minutes late, please do be sure to check the chat box for translation instructions. Okay, 5 seconds and I'm going to end the poll. It does look like our newsletter is having some impact. And we like that word of mouth. So thank you so much to everyone who shared it with your friends and colleagues. We really appreciate that. Okay. So with that, let me introduce our moderator today, Eric Bruins. Eric is the transportation director for LA City Council member Mike Bonin, who represents the 11th district on the west side of Los Angeles. As a transportation committee staff for the city council and a board deputy for Metro, Eric works on citywide and regional transportation policy, while also delivering mobility projects in the council district prior to joining the council office. Eric was the City of Culver City's first bicycle and pedestrian coordinator and the policy director for the LA County Bicycle Coalition. With a background in regional parks planning and open space conservation, Eric's career has focused on creating safe, healthy, and sustainable communities for people to enjoy. Welcome, Eric, and thank you so much for agreeing to moderate this session today.
Thank you for the introduction, Francie. Welcome and bienvenidos to everybody. Thank you for joining us today to talk about safety for people walking. These past couple of years, we've all lived through a pandemic that has put community health and safety front of mind. Like so many other issues, the pandemic's worst effects were felt in low-income communities of color. Traffic violence is no different. Our most vulnerable neighbors, low-income people of color, older adults, people with disabilities, are all disproportionately at risk from unsafe streets. As we hopefully emerge from this pandemic, it is so important that we have an equitable recovery that uplifts the needs of communities that are too often overlooked and unheard. Few things are more important than safe mobility. I think everyone can agree that our streets are not as safe for walking as they should be, and we're about to see data showing just how dangerous they are currently. I'm excited that we have a panel of folks here today that are doing this work to prioritize pedestrian safety in low-income communities and engage neighbors in the city of LA and unincorporated areas. First up to tee off the discussion, I'd like to introduce Chris Ryder from the Los Angeles Department of Transportation. Chris is a supervising transportation planner with the department. Although he was trained as an engineer, he is currently on the planning side of the operation. Chris has 20 cumulative years of experience as an engineer and a planner working with LADOT. And for the past 4 years, he's specialized on the Vision Zero initiative, which is the city of LA's effort to eliminate traffic fatalities and serious injuries. Chris, take it away.
Hey, everybody. Thank you so much for having me today. Are you ready for me to give my presentation, Francie? Okay. Wasn't sure if we were introducing everybody first. All right. I'm here to kind of give everybody a brief background on Vision Zero. I'm sure there's a lot of people in the audience who know a lot about Vision Zero, but I'm sure there's a lot of people out there who don't know anything. So kind of consider this a beginner's guide to Vision Zero. Go ahead and give the next slide. So yeah, what is Vision Zero? That's the question. Eric in his intro gave a very good intro to it. Next slide. Within the city of Los Angeles, it is a citywide effort. It's not just the Department of Transportation. Our partners in LA County Health, Bureau of Engineering, Streets LA, are all involved in this effort. And it's a citywide effort to eliminate traffic deaths in the city of Los Angeles by 2025. It emulates models that have been very effective overseas, especially in the Netherlands, where they really have succeeded in eliminating traffic deaths by transforming the way people use streets, focusing on education of how to use streets. And go ahead to the next slide. So what is LADOT's role in Vision Zero? I talked a little bit about how we're not the only ones, but I'm the one representing LADOT, so that's kind of my specialty. Next slide. So we're looking at redesigning streets for safety. but prioritizing that work on the streets where we see people getting killed, people getting severely injured. We kind of look at those two categories as the same, people whose lives are transformed through traffic crashes and the incidents that happen in our city every day. Next slide. So how do we look at actually prioritizing those projects? How do we decide what streets become Vision Zero streets, become Vision Zero projects? And how do we, it's a big problem, as you're going to see in the next slide. So I want to talk a little bit about how we try and narrow that scope. So we developed something that's called a high injury network. This was done based on best practices nationwide on how to identify your streets that have the greatest issues. So we took 5 years of our collision data from our partners with the state and LAPD. We looked at the streets that have the most crashes resulting in serious injury or in death. And we identified 6% of city streets, which is still several hundred miles of city streets. But these are the streets where 65% of the fatal and serious injury incidents happen. 65% of bicycle and pedestrian ones specifically. It also accounts for a pretty similar amount of vehicular deaths are just on this small portion of the city streets, which is still a large swath of streets, but it's what we're looking at. Next slide. So we then further divide this into different focus areas. So my group, Vision Zero, we identify priority corridors, a subset within this high injury network, where we're able to focus most of our efforts at making those transformative changes. Adams Boulevard was one that we did recently, Avalon Boulevard last year, Broadway. We've touched upon a lot of different parts of the city, and we've got right now about 80 corridors that we consider our priorities, and we've done pretty transformative work on still only a fraction of them. There's still a lot to do. We also have other areas, Safe Routes to School, Safe Routes to Senior, and our active transportation programs that look at other areas that are impacted by this. Next slide. So let me tell you a little bit more about why traffic safety is such a priority for us, why it's kind of the overriding element of what LADOT does, so much so that we've got Vision Zero, this dedicated multi-million-dollar program for it. Next slide. Speed is one of the primary factors in what happens as the outcome of traffic crash. One of the core principles of Vision Zero, what it's built on, is that crashes are not preventable. You can't stop crashes from happening, but you can mitigate their impact. You can make sure that when a driver, a pedestrian, a bicyclist makes a mistake, because we're human, we all make mistakes, that mistake shouldn't be fatal. It shouldn't result in transformative change to somebody's life. One of the key things that happens is with speed, you can look at when a vehicle hits a person walking at different speeds. This is how likely that person is to result in a fatality. And even when you look at the other portion, as you get higher, just because they survive doesn't mean that they don't break an arm, lose a limb, end up in a coma, have something that just dramatically changes the rest of their life. And that's what we're working to avoid, is identifying where vehicles and cars do need to interchange, that if something happens, it's going to happen at a lower speed, where it's going to be more survivable and result in less negative outcomes. Next slide. Next slide, Jose. Oh, thank you. So a person walking is 16 times more likely to die in a crash than a person in a vehicle. That seems kind of obvious on its face, but the second stat is what really kind of makes that jump out, is that while pedestrians and people riding bicycles or motorcycles are in a small fraction, less than 25% of all traffic collisions, they represent 64% of all traffic fatalities. So most crashes that happen in the city and nationwide are two vehicles hitting each other. But most people who are dying are those few who do get hit and are in a more vulnerable position. So next slide. Age matters. Older adults are only 11%, 26% of pedestrian fatalities. And then this second stat is something that strikes really close to home for me, as I do have 2 children in this age. Traffic collisions are the #1 cause of death for children under the age of 14. everything else, that is the number one cause. And that's just a tragedy that we unfortunately live with. Next slide. And then equity, that's something that is really important to us. And I think Eric touched on it a little bit earlier. The top neighborhoods for serious and fatal crashes are all primarily either low income or are mainly populated by people of color. And so we look to prioritize adding resources to those areas that have seen this investment. Next slide. So just real quick, in the last couple minutes I have here, I want to talk about some of the tools we have in our safety toolkit, and a lot of them impact the theme of our conversation here today about pedestrians. So go ahead to the next slide. These are some of our quick build safety items. A lot of them really help with pedestrians. Those high visibility crosswalks that you're probably seeing everywhere in the city now make it more obvious that pedestrians do belong in the roadway. It's not just those little lines that are easy to ignore. Leading pedestrian intervals have been one of our more successful things. That's where the pedestrian gets a head start to start crossing the street before vehicles get the green light. Where we've been able to do lane reconfigurations, we're already seeing results in lowered speeds, which will result in a lower fatal incidents for people on bicycles and pedestrians. Next slide. Some of our items that take a little bit longer to do, traffic signals and left turns, of course, but a lot more of these pedestrian beacons. This one shown is often called a hawk or a pedestrian hybrid beacon, and it's something that actually stops traffic. It gets a red light and allows the pedestrian to cross without giving also the cars on a cross street the right of way, something that is a pedestrian safety device that is truly built for pedestrians. Next slide. And then we work on a lot more what we call civil improvements, concrete, putting that out on the ground, curb extensions that shorten the distance for pedestrians crossing the roadway, refuge islands where they can take shelter and cross one part of the street at a time, and then bus boarding islands, which again can often speak to that equity lens, where we have a lot of disinvestment with our bus infrastructure. These bus boarding islands help with bicycles, but they also provide a great clear waiting space for people who choose to use buses and transit. And then I think I've got one more slide. And then these are some new things we're trying, which is a modular items. And modular just means something that we can kind of quickly build, put in the ground. It represents a future concrete investment, but we're able to test it out, find out if there's any flaws. So we've got some bus boarding islands. We put those out in Avalon. This modular pedestrian refuge island is over at Hollywood Boulevard in Lyman if you want to check it out. And the left turn column is something that we're starting to put all over the city in places where left turning vehicles have struck pedestrians in the past. That's everything I have. In the next slide, the final slide, you can see how to contact me and the website where you can learn a lot more about Vision Zero and the other programs that the Department of Transportation is working on citywide. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Chris. Next up, our next panelist is Arturo Nevarez, who is with LANI. Arturo joined LANI in 2017 and is responsible for many transit and pedestrian-oriented projects, such as pedestrian plans, sidewalk reconstruction, and facade redevelopment. Most recently, he developed a transit-oriented development plan for the city of Huntington Park, which included robust community engagement. Before joining LANI, Arturo worked with nonprofit advocacy groups, labor unions, and the California State Legislature, where he served as a senior field representative in the 48th Assembly District. Please welcome Arturo. You're up.
Thank you. Well, thank you, everyone. My role here is to share information about what a pedestrian plan is. I have been with LANI, as Eric mentioned, 5 years, and last year was my first work in the pedestrian plan.
Arturo,
yes.
I'm not hearing you. I'm not sure about other people.
I'll get closer.
You're not on mute.
Hi, is it better now?
Have you chosen the language in the interpretation? Make sure that you have English chosen.
English. Okay.
Awesome.
Can you
Thank
hear
you
me?
so
Great,
much.
great. Thank you, boss.
Let me
Sorry about that,
say,
boss.
sorry, I don't mean to, I don't want to interrupt you, but people who could hear him before, that means you did not have your translation turned on. So you might want to do that now or before our next speaker. Go ahead, Arturo. I'm sorry to
Thank you.
interrupt you.
No problem. So what is a pedestrian plan? As I was saying, LANI has been working with the Department of Public Health in creating 2 pedestrian plans in unincorporated areas. This is our second phase in engagement with the Department of Public Health and the pedestrian plan. So pedestrian plan, as you can see in the slide, it provides guidance for developing pedestrian facilities and programs. And these are in areas, again, in unincorporated areas in the county of Los Angeles, which first and foremost have not had a lot of oversight or attention focused by our city leaders because they are unincorporated. So the purpose of a pedestrian plan is to allow people to walk safely, comfortably to key destinations like parks, schools, and local businesses throughout their neighborhoods. The pedestrian plan, again, it provides a guidance and it serves as a baseline approach to identify these needs. And as I mentioned, in unincorporated areas of Los Angeles County, these are areas where the pedestrian plan helps identify these needs. And it's a way of responding to the concerns that have been identified by residents, stakeholders, and organizations working in the communities. An example, as I will be talking a bit more, regards our work in Florence Firestone in Los Angeles County. Currently, there's no mayor, there's no city council. There's a supervisor's office. Supervisor Holly Mitchell is really active in the area. And we are working with them and their available field representatives to keep this going, to bring their eyes, have the attention of their eyes in the neighborhood. Next slide, please. So a bit of a project background on the pedestrian plan before we get into this. In 2019, the first pedestrian plan was adopted in the unincorporated neighborhoods of Walnut Park, West Athens, and Whittier Los Nietos. Those plans have been adopted by the Board of Supervisors in 2019. That was the first phase of the pedestrian plan. That plan will serve as a tool to use when grants become available, and grants or other budgeted programs that are available. Certain implementations can take years because it's not a quick fix or a quick build, but however, some infrastructure improvements that have been identified and vetted by community members can take place more immediately, like maybe quick build programs that was described by Chris. It's all about the available funding, as we all know. But in order to address a problem, you need to have a plan. And this pedestrian plan is a way of taking that first large step. The phase 2 that we are working on currently regards 4 neighborhoods. This work started in January 2021. And the 4 neighborhoods that we are currently working on is Florence Firestone, East Rancho Dominguez, West Willowbrook, and East Los Angeles. Currently, LANI is working in outreach and engagement for 2 neighborhoods, Florence Firestone and East Rancho Dominguez. The first main objective when we do this work is creating awareness and building support for this program. And that all involves creating an advisory committee. And I saw one of our advisory committee members attending this forum, so that's awesome. So it's working, folks. As you can see, an advisory committee is very important because that's basically the baseline of support that you need to collect feedback and disseminate the feedback. But why are we doing this? Why are we focusing on walking? As you can see, just an example here on the screen, this is just Florence Firestone. Obesity is very high in this area. 43% of adults have obesity. Youth obesity is at 38%. 10% of households have no vehicles, and pedestrian-involved collisions are at 42%. The pedestrian plan goal is to identify projects, policies, and programs that will make our communities more walkable. A lot of these activities, projects could include better sidewalks, crosswalks, more trees, more canopy in the area, and just other ideas that will bring more of these changes in the community. Next slide, please. Now, again, just going back on the project background, as I mentioned, the first phase of the pedestrian plan, I'm sorry, the first phase of the pedestrian plan took place in 2019. That has been adopted, as I mentioned. Some improvements you can see in Walnut Park have started to occur. Long-term improvements will take a little longer to implement based on the funding, but the plan is already there, and the Board of Supervisors have already adopted the plan. So it's a tool, an advocacy tool that they could turn back and point out what can we implement quicker based on the available funding that the Board of Supervisors has on their current fiscal year. Again, so next slide, please. So our goals in the pedestrian plan are fourfold. First of all, we identify needed improvements. We improve connectivity to community resources such as schools, parks, and transit. All this is the goal is to reduce collisions involving people walking, and also identify solutions to challenges to that walking. Other challenges that we have experienced is when you're working in a neighborhood that does not have an established organization or association, resident leaders. We have experienced that challenge in East Rancho Dominguez. Unlike Florence Firestone neighborhood, where 3 active organizations have been part of our committees. For example, the Florence Firestone Community Organization, they are very active in their neighborhood, providing various type of resources for residents. Juntos Florence Firestone Together is another very active group made up of resident leaders, activists working for change in their neighborhood. And most recently, a Safe Passage Committee organized by Dr. Cynthia Gonzalez with Diego Rivera Learning Complex. That has been formed as of last year, and it's a great way of addressing these needs, providing feedback, attending events, sharing the information to residents who we may not be connected to, and all that feedback is then collected, transmitted to designers, who then create the first draft of the plan. Next slide, please. And on this final slide, we'll show the importance of why we need these community advisory committees to be active and present in our planning. They are the ones who provide the feedback on where the need is more, where need is much needed. For example, the picture on top shows you a crosswalk that was a before picture in one of the first pedestrian plan projects. The picture underneath shows what took place afterwards. Once studies were made, maybe a walk audit, a pedestrian account, information that fed into the plan, the design phase, which in then turn created this opportunity. But again, going back to having an active voice in the community is really important. We are trying to work on the challenges, for example, in East Rancho Dominguez, by establishing a baseline group of a network of support networks, so that we could start building out and providing the same experience that, for example, Florence Firestone already has, of existing neighborhood stakeholders who are really who really want to fight for change in their neighborhoods. Which is why it's important for us to first reach out to folks where they are at, invite them into the conversation, be very transparent in the project, the challenges ahead, and basically why we need them to join on to this effort. This is not a month-to-month project. These projects could take about 2 to 3 years. So it's very important to have residents who understand the long-term support and commitment needed, which is a perfect segue to the next presenter that we have. So I'll let Eric take it from here and present our next presenter and community resident.
Great, thank you so much, Arturo. Next up, we have Gaby Segovia. Gaby is from the beautiful state of Durango, Mexico. She lives in Wilmington with her husband and 4 children. Seeking the best for her children, Gaby became involved in her schools and in community groups that advocate for the well-being of families. She has been trained as a promotora and facilitator with Los Angeles Walks, and she is also active with Best Start Wilmington. Wilmington Sin Fronteras, and Wilmington Calles Seguras, Familias Sanas. Gaby is passionate about helping, and when the word can't crosses her path, she finds a reason and a way to keep going. Go ahead, Gaby. Thank you.
¿Qué tal a todos? Bienvenidos, buenas tardes. Gracias a LANI por la oportunidad de presentar hoy aquí un poquito nada más de un gran logro que se hizo ahora en enero de este año, un cruce decorativo en nuestra comunidad de Wilmington. A continuación vamos a ir mirando algunas imágenes y con ello voy a ir diciendo un poco de la historia. Cuando uno pasa por un cruce decorativo, por un cruce normal, uno dice, oh, es un cruce, pero nuestro cruce en nuestra comunidad de Wilmington lleva pasión, lleva corazón y lleva la necesidad de hacer cambios en nuestras calles para las personas que caminamos. Yo soy parte de mi comunidad, como ya lo mencionamos. Soy parte de grandes grupos y organizaciones locales aquí en mi comunidad. Una de ellas es Vestar Wilmington, en la cual se me dio la oportunidad de conocer a LAWAX. Me encantó su visión y su misión, que es por abogar por calles seguras. ¿Por qué llegué a Vestar Wilmington? Soy una madre de 4 hijos, busco siempre lo mejor para ellos. Y encontré en Vestar y en el LAWAX que una de las cosas por las cuales tengo que trabajar es en las calles de mi comunidad y de donde sea. Porque la mayoría de los accidentes, de las muertes trágicas en niños y adolescentes ocurren en nuestras calles. Yo quiero que mis hijos y los de mi comunidad crezcan, se realicen, lleguen a la universidad, logren sus sueños. Al presentarnos esta oportunidad de hacer este cruce decorativo, no fue fácil. Tuvimos que pasar muchos retos. Si pueden darle al otro página, sí. Esto aquí empieza un sueño. Aquí fue cómo queríamos mirar en esta intersección. ¿Por qué es la L y la Figueroa Street aquí en Wilmington, California? La identificamos porque tenía muchas cosas importantes donde tenía que haber este cruce. Este cruce está entre la comunidad y el colegio, el Harvard College, y aquí los domingos se hace un swami, donde hay mucho tráfico de personas, donde están cruzando para un lado y para el otro. Se nos hizo una intersección muy importante donde podíamos hacer este cruce decorativo. Así era como se empezó a trabajar. Este diseño se agarró porque hicimos un concurso en nuestra comunidad donde la comunidad tenía la oportunidad de qué querían mirar en ese cruce. Queríamos que ellos sean parte de este sueño, de esta visión, y aquí ganó un joven donde plasma en este cruce. Son diseños que simbolizan a muchas partes de nuestra comunidad de Wilmington. La siguiente, por favor. Aquí mis hijos, el por qué una madre como yo, una miembro de la comunidad, el por qué buscamos el día a día lo mejor para nuestras calles, nuestra comunidad. Sé que muchos aquí tienen un porqué, llegaron hoy hasta aquí, el por qué hoy están luchando para mejorar las calles de toda nuestra comunidad, de nuestra ciudad. La siguiente, por favor. Vestar y Los Ángeles Wax. Ellas son las dos organizaciones que a mí me han ayudado mucho, me han dado las herramientas, me han guiado para esta abogacía por calles seguras. Siguiente. Este es un equipo el cual era parte de, no es parte de Vestar Wilmington, y un comité que se llama Seguridad. Vestar Wilmington se enfoca en 5 prioridades aquí en Wilmington y una de ellas es la seguridad. y quisimos que la seguridad fuera en las calles. Ellas fueron las que iniciamos desde un principio este proyecto. Están ahí el equipo de Vestar Wilmington, de Fresh Fire LA, y mis compañeras Iraís Colín y Nancy Cid Gómez. Ella ahorita está aquí en la presentación también. Siguiente, por favor. Les quiero platicar un poco. El llegar a tener nuestro cruce decorativo no fue fácil. Aprendimos mucho y la primera que yo les quiero enseñar, lleguen a sus representantes políticos, hablen, no peleen, hablen. Díganles que ustedes también están ahí, que los quieren ayudar a hacer esos cambios. Y mucho de esto nos ayudó mucho Fernando Navarrete y Laura Gil, que son parte del staff del Distrito 15. Laura es directora de transportación en nuestro distrito. Fernando Navarrete también nuestro representante diputado de distrito. Grandes personas. Fernando es nacido, creado aquí en Wilmington. Él nos ha apoyado mucho. Entonces, ese es un tip que quiero darles o un poco para poder llegar a los cambios que uno quiera lograr. No busquen pelear. No busquen ir a decir los problemas porque todos ya saben qué problemas hay. Digan, aquí estoy, quiero buscar contigo y trabajar contigo las soluciones. Siguiente, por favor. Este cruce se tenía que llevar en poco tiempo. Yo me imaginaba que ya a los 3 meses ya iba a haber un cruce decorativo. Fueron 3 largos años que fueron muchas reuniones, juntas, más reuniones, correos electrónicos que no contestaban, que nos dejaron en hold por mucho tiempo, pero la perseverancia, el amor y la pasión como miembros de nuestra comunidad, porque sabemos lo que queremos, nos hizo estar aquí, y el apoyo de esas organizaciones detrás de nosotros, Vestar Wilmington y LA Wax. La siguiente, por favor. Aquí se llegó el momento donde por fin llegamos a que ya se va a hacer. LADOT nos empezó ya a tener respuestas, soluciones, a trabajar juntos, el empezar a actuar. Aquí me da mucha alegría mostrar estas fotos porque este día yo quería llorar. Era como, wow, se logró el día donde ya están aquí ingenieros, los que iban a pintar, los artistas, donde ya estaban viendo esa calle donde iba a plasmarse ese cruce decorativo. Y como siempre, si miran en la foto, está el Distrito 15 ahí siempre apoyándonos, Vestar Wilmington, LA Wax. Llegamos en los momentos que ya lo estaban pintando. Queríamos que nos pellizcaran porque pensamos que esto no se iba a lograr. La siguiente. Y se hizo. Se logró. Y van a decir, hay un cruce decorativo que, claro, un cruce decorativo nos ayuda mucho a reducir las velocidades, nos da belleza y arte a nuestra comunidad. Cada 90 minutos en Estados Unidos están muriendo niños y jóvenes por accidentes peatonales. Yo he pasado, vengan, los invito a que pasen. Desde lejos se mira ese color y te vas parando porque quieres ver todo qué es. Entonces te paras desde mucho antes. O sea, sí ayuda mucho a reducir la velocidad. Y lamentablemente todos esos accidentes, como ya lo han mencionado, ocurren más en nuestras comunidades de bajos recursos. Nuestra comunidad de bajos recursos se enfoca en traer comida y pagar la renta. Ellos no están pensando si hay más peligros en la calle, en nuestras calles. Por eso a personas como nosotros somos su voz de ellos. Estamos aquí para enseñarles que el camino no es fácil, pero se puede lograr. Enseñarle con la experiencia propia los pasos a seguir para cualquier cambio. Un stop, una banca con sombra en las paradas de bus, cruces decorativos, todo. Y hemos enseñado también que se tienen que educar e informar, ir a reuniones donde va a haber que va a haber cambios en nuestra comunidad para que den su voz y digan, ok, esos cambios también, pero a mí me beneficiaría que lo hagas así. Gracias. Siguiente, por favor. Y pues aquí finalizo, no sé si con esta frase, yo hago lo que tú no puedes y tú haces lo que yo no puedo. Juntos podemos hacer grandes cosas. Esto incluye yo en mi hogar, mi comunidad, organizaciones, líderes comunitarios, representantes políticos y los que se encargan en hacer el trabajo en los cambios en nuestras calles. Los pequeños cambios empiezan con el corazón. La información y la educación es la mejor arma para combatir el mundo y sus problemas. Gracias.
Thank you so much, Gaby. I loved seeing your stories and your photos. They're very impactful. So next up, we have the question and answer part of the presentation. So I would like to give the audience an opportunity to write your questions into the Q&A. And while you're doing that, I will start with a couple questions of my own for the panelists. First up, I actually have a question for Gaby, which is, what is something that you know now from your experience that you wish you knew when you first started getting involved?
Mandar un correo electrónico. Mandar.
Okay. Excellent.
Manejar un poco la computadora. Eso ha sido una herramienta muy, muy buena y que nos han brindado LWACs para llegar a esta abogacía. Pero otra bien importante es el poder trabajar en conjunto, el poder ser y el poder conocer a nuestros representantes. ¿Quiénes son? Y llegarles y decir, esto me preocupa, quiero trabajar en esto. Ellos no lo van a hacer todo, porque recordemos, son un representante para cuántas, como en mi comunidad somos 56,000 personas. Ellos les va a ayudar mucho que tú llegues y le digas, quiero trabajar en esto, y ellos te van a guiar quiénes son las personas que nos van a ayudar en eso. En esta ocasión, Fernando nos dijo, Laura Gil es la persona correcta para lo que ustedes están buscando. Gracias.
Thank you very much. Question for Chris and then Arturo. Why does it take so long to implement pedestrian improvements? And maybe more importantly, what can community members do to move the process along and get projects done sooner?
The answer to that question really depends on what the improvement is and where you're making it. One thing that delays a lot of pedestrian improvements nowadays is we have to build out curb ramps. We have to make sure everything we do is fully accessible. It's important. It's a matter of equity. But unfortunately, the design capacity to build those curb ramps, design them, put them in, can add as much as a year to some projects. But where that's not an issue, it's really just about identifying where it needs to go. And if we're popping up some flashing yellow lights, they can go pretty quickly. I think what the community can really do is get involved. We are going out the neighborhoods. We're in Wilmington right now for improvements on Anaheim Street. So that's an area that we're really excited about doing things. When those opportunities arise, make sure your area is not forgotten. I showed that map. Even the 6% that we're focusing on is a huge area, and we learned so much from the community. So just get involved.
Thank you, Chris. Arturo?
Yeah, and just reiterating the importance of keeping the consistency with the engagement, having leaders like Gaby, Yanel, other folks from the Florence Firestone Community Organization. These folks are already active. And either, for an example, our project with LANI and working on the pedestrian plan, our engagement of this work will end in 2023 or so. So, our agency may not have a presence monthly at the meetings, at events, But our goal is to have established a working group of residents and leaders who continue that work moving forward. We all know that there's a lot of changes with your city officials, supervisor's office. The field reps leave every year. These local officials are rotated every 2 years because of elections. So people change, and that's just the nature of the of where we live, of our infrastructure, our mechanisms. But the contact number of these offices do not change. So you could still call those offices, find out who the new constituent manager is, who your local representative is, and get in touch with them. Invite them to those meetings that they may not be aware of, because what your actions could always trigger something else. You remember that your engagement with local officials working on a certain project can trigger other actions to happen. And when you're looking for a guidance, you could always turn back to the pedestrian plan or other work that's been done in the past. So just consistency and tracking your connections and any changes with your local government, and using local community organizations, nonprofits like LANI, to make those connections again if you lose touch. So keep in touch with all the folks that you've been working with.
Great. Thank you, Arturo. I'd like to turn it over to some audience questions. The first one is, are there any statistics to show the benefits of the pedestrian crossings, the colorful pedestrian crossings that were just installed in Wilmington? Or is it actually too soon to know?
Yeah, that crosswalk was done pretty recently. I think it was in the last 2 or 3 months. We usually don't get data that quickly back for areas, and fortunately, deaths are rare enough that it really does take 5 years of data to really see an impact on that. But we will be looking closely at it in terms of just pedestrian incidents at that location. We've done similar colorful installations before. I know downtown LA near one of those museums, we did one, and I do think it saw improvements. I don't have the data in front of me, but I've heard good things about it.
Gaby, have you noticed a change in drivers' behavior near the new crosswalks?
Pues el principal impacto que ha habido en nuestra comunidad, que dicen, ¿qué es esto? ¡Wow! ¡Qué bonito! Van y pasan, se toman fotos, pues no sé, será un día ir ahí y entrevistar a los que están pasando. Este es el primer impacto, eso es que una pequeña comunidad como Wilmington ha logrado un cruce decorativo, donde en grandes ciudades fuera de Estados Unidos se usan mucho estos cruces decorativos. No más así con rayitas, Gracias. Y sí, pues sí nos han comentado que es algo muy bonito. Una amiga me comentó que su niño quiso pasar 2 veces. Claro, cuando le tocaba el turno, no cuando está la luz en rojo, pero sí, porque los colores le llamaron la atención. Pero vamos a esperar estos 5 años a ver si hay algún resultado en esta calle de Figueroa y L Street, para si hay beneficio y seguir inspirando a otras comunidades de que lo hagan. Ahorita voy a comentar algo de LAGOT, como le preguntaste, Eric, que por qué se tarda tanto. Una de lo que nos pasó a nosotros, experiencia propia, que cambiaban de persona encargada, pero no nos avisaban. O sea, el correo electrónico siempre. Entonces, nomás un detallito de LAGOT, ahí pónganse bien atentos con los empleados. Gracias.
Thank you. And judging by the chat and the questions, you have inspired a lot of the people here as well with your work. Okay, the next question is about plants, and I guess I'm going to use a little bit of moderator privilege to change the question a little bit, but I think a lot of communities, people people drive slower and pay more attention when a place looks like a real place. And I think part of that is making it look more beautiful. And the crosswalks was one way to do that. But another way to do that is trees and landscaping and those types of beautification that LANI is so good at and has a long history of doing. How should a community go about kind of re-landscaping in the public right-of-way, or doing those types of projects that have both sustainability and safety and build community pride? Arturo.
Yeah, thank you, Eric. Yeah, for highways, my experience, the owner of the highways is Caltrans, and they're such a large organization, agency, that in order to really tap into the highway system, you really need to find out who your direct contact in the district is. So you have to find out, using your zip code, find out who your representative is, either at the assembly level or at the Senate level, and definitely more locally at the assembly level. You can find out who your leader is at with the state. Then you could connect to maybe their transportation deputy or transportation field deputy. They could connect. Then you could connect, kind of move up the ladder and address the issue that you want to plant desert plants on the desert highway. But definitely you got to do some research, find out who your direct contact is at the local level and then at the state level, because Caltrans is a big organization, agency all throughout California, but they are the owners of the highways. And but the efforts to connect to your leaders is always the same. Just do some search, use your zip code, your address, and you could be connected to that field representative and just talk to them that you have this idea about a project. They could probably connect you to an organization that has similar needs, and then you could just take it from there. That's my experience.
Great, thank you. Any of the other panelists have anything to add? Okay. Just a reminder to the audience that if you would like to ask a question of the panelists, please use the Q&A feature down below, so that way we can handle that. I will ask another question myself, which is, in Los Angeles, we oftentimes have neighborhoods that are nice places to walk or safe places to walk, but then we have these major streets that cut through them and oftentimes divide our neighborhoods from the places that we need to go, whether it's school or the bus stop or what have you. What are some ways in which we can make those major streets easier and safer to cross, so that way they divide our communities less? Any panelist who wants to take that can jump in.
Yeah, I mean that's a big part of what we're doing. I think Adams Boulevard recently is a great project in getting there. There was a school right in the middle. I'm forgetting the name of it. That was a piece of that, and we had students who were crossing this large 4-lane roadway. So we've narrowed it down to 2 lanes for vehicles, and then added bike lanes. And the hope is that with fewer vehicles to look at, it's easier for those kids to cross the street getting to school. In places where that's not possible, it's all about just providing crossing opportunities that are protected. Western Avenue is a place where we've got a lot of schools, a lot of crossings right now that aren't fully protected. They're marked and maybe they have a flashing yellow, which can confuse drivers. So we're working on replacing a lot of those with the Hawks, the ones that really stop traffic. And we're very hopeful that that will result in safety improvements for those kids crossing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and Eric, I'd also like to add, LANI has actually we're finishing up a project too with Los Angeles LA DOT regarding an active transportation grant that was received with Caltrans called Stress-Free Streets, and our program manager Jose is part of that as well, leading that effort. And that program it was one of the projects identifying high stress connections in areas like in South LA near Exposition Park. So those are those exact streets that you had mentioned where there's no connectivity, and a lot of that work involved robust outreach, online surveys, We had posters on street signs where folks could use their smartphone and click on a survey, and they could give us their experience of how stressful it is to walk on this really narrow street. And that project is really new. It's kind of wrapping up, I believe. And that was a grant that came from Caltrans, implemented by LADOT. So it's one example that's currently taking place.
That's a great program. Stress-free Streets is very, very neat in terms of connecting neighborhood streets to each other and solving some of those gaps. Arturo, can you talk a little bit about some of the treatments that you are using on those neighborhood streets to make them safer to walk?
I think at this time they're looking at creating crosswalks, maybe putting more street lights in those areas, and some curb bulb outs, I believe, as well. The main goal is just decreasing the speed and any traffic calming measures. And they're also very highly focusing on bicyclists and the right of way for bicyclists. Part of this project that we did, which is really cool, we did a bike audit. So LANI staff, LADOT staff, and some neighborhood association, depending on the neighborhood we were working with, we would do bike audits, and we rode around the neighborhood and providing our own personal experience of how stressful it is. So we would first meet on a Saturday, do a little quick session of what we're gonna do, get on our bikes, ride around the neighborhood, and then we would meet at the end and then share what we experienced, and all that information gets documented and used for improvements. So it was a really neat project.
Great, thank you. Gaby, I believe you wanted to add your thoughts here.
Sí, gracias. Sobre la pregunta que estaba diciendo y está contestando Arturo y algunas de las cosas que está diciendo él. Pues yo pienso que para cualquier cambio que hagas en la comunidad, en las calles, para que tenga el mejor resultado positivo, tienes que preguntarle a la comunidad que vive ahí. En cada comunidad hay una necesidad diferente y una manera diferente de poner una luz, un stop, un cruce decorativo. Porque nadie puede opinar, ni hacer, ni trabajar si tú no vives ahí. Entonces, yo siempre, nuestra abogacía, nosotros, mi compañera, todo es decirle a la comunidad, habla, y decirle a todos los que se encargan de hacer estos cambios, para que tu trabajo tenga el mayor positivismo y que el dinero que se invierta en las comunidades no se tire a la basura. Pregúntale a la comunidad, ten el 1 al 1. Como dice Arturo, bájate, ve y camina. Ahí donde te están diciendo qué pasa. No vayas una vez, ve diferentes horas, diferentes días de la semana y te vas a dar cuenta de lo que la comunidad te está diciendo. Entonces ahí yo siento que el dinero que se usaría no se tiraría a la basura. Ahorita lo estoy viendo, el IDT está dando encuestas, está mandando correos electrónicos, pero la comunidad le hace falta el 1 al 1, el que trabajen más con organizaciones, con líderes y que vean que de verdad quieren hacer el cambio, pero pregúntenle a los que vivan ahí. No supongan que porque funcionó en una ciudad va a funcionar en otra, no, porque las necesidades son diferentes, pero siempre con el mismo propósito.
Great, thank you. I want to take one question from the chat, and this is for Chris. How should a constituent report a crosswalk that needs to be, where the paint is faded and needs to be refreshed?
Yeah, so we have recently shifted our request system to go with the citywide 311 system. So if you go through 311, you let them know where that's faded, that will get to that district office, and they do great work responding directly to community concerns like that, ones that don't require something new, especially maintenance.
Thank you. So a question from an attendee about somebody who lives in Inglewood and wants to also see beautiful crosswalks like Gaby was able to install. How should he or she go about starting that conversation with the city of Inglewood? Maybe this is for Arturo, since you work in so many different jurisdictions.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, that was a great question. I would like to invite that person. Just call me directly. We need people like you. Definitely. Like for example, we're working in East Rancho Dominguez right now for the pedestrian plan. So that's like East Compton. Like I mentioned earlier, the challenges there is there hasn't been a strong community organization that we could tap into, like in Florence Firestone. So we're creating that baseline of resident stakeholders who we could, start creating some actionable next steps. For the city of Inglewood, I know that in order to address something, like for example, if you want a speed bump, that's just that's like, let's say you want a speed bump in a street that's really high injury. One thing you could do is you can start obtaining signatures from residents that live close to you. I understand that if you obtain signature up to 75% of residents near you where you would like a crosswalk, that could be then submitted to Public Works, and I think it triggers a response. But if you start collecting signatures from residents that live within your area near the change that you want to see, that's the first step. And then you could take that list and then contact your representative with the city of Inglewood. I wouldn't know, I haven't worked closely with Inglewood, but I know that you could easily find who the representative is if you look at your the supervisor's office and see how you could connect with someone there. But doing some petition, collecting signatures is a good start. I would recommend that.
Great, thank you. I would like to let's see. We have a question from the audience that says, when is LA Metro going to move buses off Harry Bridges, and talks about the importance of making sure that it's safe to cross the street at bus stops. Chris, can you talk a little bit about the coordination between LADOT and Metro in making sure that bus stops are in safe locations?
Yeah, I think whenever there's a change to a bus stop or a new bus stop coming in, there's a lot of cross coordination. We have a coordinator who works out in our Western District office, but handles citywide bus stops. We really do look to make sure there are crossings at each one when we can. Ones that are missing it usually get added into our work plans. And something else that we've tried to do whenever we're doing kind of a capital project is to move those bus stops to the far side of an intersection. That ends up reducing the conflict between buses, right turns, and pedestrians. That particular location in question, again, if you reach out to 311, get in contact with your local district office, they're going to be the best ones handled to help you with that. But citywide is definitely something we're aware of, and we meet with Metro pretty often to try and make these as safe and usable as we can.
Great, thank you. I have a question for Gaby. Can you talk about the significance of the art in your crosswalks?
Claro que sí. En mi cruce que hicimos, en mi cruce de mi comunidad, o la importancia de cruces decorativos.
Yes. The art that you installed in the crosswalk, can you tell us what the art represents?
Sí, representa la Casa Blanca, es un museo aquí de Wilmington, es donde vivió creo, ¿cómo se dice? Perdón. Fundador aquí en Wilmington. Tiene unas de barco. Ese es un símbolo muy en mi comunidad. Lo tiene la LANI High School. Cualquiera que dice soy de la LANI, o también está el puente, el que conecta aquí en San Pedro, en el puerto, y el puerto, por supuesto. Entonces son símbolos que nuestra comunidad se identifica mucho. que si lo ven se sienten orgullosos de mirarlo, de cargarlo en playeras, gorras, como el símbolo ese del pallet, de la timón, no sé cómo se dice, de barco. Y pues para nuestra comunidad latina, ustedes saben que los símbolos representan mucho de nosotros y nos enorgullecemos en traerlo y que nos represente.
Thank you so much for explaining that. I have one more question, which is how can community members advocate for funding from the city or the county to go to pedestrian improvements in their neighborhoods? So how can community members help fund projects? Maybe that question is for Chris or Arturo.
Sorry, can you repeat that one?
What's the best way that a community member can help advocate for more funding for pedestrian improvements, either generally or for a particular pedestrian improvement in their neighborhood?
Yeah, on the funding thing, one thing that's great is the recent infrastructure bill at the federal level actually has some new funding that we're looking to pursue. So we're finding a lot nowadays, funding is less an issue than it is our staff capacity. So find some people out there who have studied as planners or engineers, encourage them to apply to work for the city, because we need a lot more people working on this if we're ever going to get to the level we need to be. But definitely talk to your local council people. If you're in other cities, talk to your elected officials. Let them know about the funding that's available. There's a lot of grants out there, and some cities aren't always aware. The grant process can be complicated. There's a lot of great resources out there for them, and I've heard in various cities and even here in LA, we've had advocates who find grant opportunities, match it up with the city, and help kind of guide that through so that they can be partnered. The My Figueroa project, where it put in bike lanes near USC and up through downtown, that actually came out of the efforts of a community member originally to get that money for the city.
Thank you. One thing I will add is that the city and the county right now are going through their annual budget processes. The mayor just released his proposed budget yesterday, and the city council will be deliberating it over the next month or so. So now is a great time to contact your council member and say how important Vision Zero funding is, because the mayor proposed one funding level and the council could decide to increase it if it is a priority for the council. So it's a very good time to reach out and advocate with your council member for Vision Zero. Gaby, what would you like to add?
Gracias. Sobre los fondos, como nuestra experiencia, fue un punto que debo mencionar. Nuestro cruce decorativo, el por qué lo quisimos someter la aplicación fue una oportunidad de LGOT de un tipo de beca para hacer un cambio en las comunidades. Nosotros aplicamos y era un fondo así, era de una beca, que después se complicó todo porque pues no cumplían con lo que habían prometido y la beca era de un precio y cabe señalar que cada aplicación tiene sus reglas y lo que uno tiene que cumplir al pie de la letra, que yo no sabía, que yo nomás pensaba que era pedir y poner y ya. Y una de esas son aseguranzas, muchas cosas para implementar eso. Y esta aseguranza era más de $1 millón lo que pedían en esa aplicación, y ahí nos apoyó Vestar Wilmington con eso, para poder que todo cumpliéramos al pie de la letra para someter esa aplicación. No es así color de rosa como se puede decir, hoy sí hay mucho dinero. Lo que necesitamos es que nos expliquen cómo usar bien ese dinero. Pero lo de nuestro cruce fue una oportunidad de beca. No fue algo que, aquí está y vamos a hacer este cruce. Entonces sí lo quiero aclarar para que no vean como que no todo es color de rosa. No es imposible y lo podemos lograr comunicándonos y teniendo la información correcta.
That's such a great point. It's so important if you want to find a grant to talk to people who have been successful before. And there are experts in the departments for kind of federal or state grants. There are experts in the council office that can help connect you with the department. So definitely reach out to your council office. Or there's organizations like Los Angeles Walks that Gaby is involved with that have a lot of experience in getting the access to those types of grants for community organizations as well. So reach out to the, to the organizations that that you're familiar with in your council office, and of course LANI as well. LANI is an expert at winning funding for community work. Okay, I am seeing a number of questions that are very, very, very hyper local to Wilmington. Chris, some of these are about your Anaheim project. Can you talk a little bit about what you're proposing to do on Anaheim and how you're gathering community input?
Yeah, we're still in the middle of our outreach. We're kind of doing two things. We had a focus group that was virtual last week. We've been trying to have some physical outreach, and we've just, however we're connecting with the community, we're not getting the right connection to hold those events. I think they're still working on that. So definitely take a look at the LADOT Livable Streets website for more information on that. And you have my email address as well that I put in the chat. And I can connect you directly to the project manager for that. But what we're trying to do is two things. One is short term, we want to put in bike lanes. We want to add the left turn pockets. We want to restore some of the parking on Anaheim and reduce it to one lane in each direction to kind of slow down the traffic a little bit, keep people from getting hit, especially pedestrians, and add more crossing. But long term, we're looking at a grant funding application through the state's active transportation program. We're looking for several $1 million to boost up that infrastructure, add concrete, not just to Anaheim, but to the greater Wilmington area. There's a lot of bike infrastructure in Wilmington. It's actually one of the densest bike infrastructures in the entire nation. And we want to continue to help support people by doing more stress-free connections, adding protection to some of those bike lanes, calming neighborhood streets through traffic circles, dividers, and definitely taking a little piece of what's going on there with the trucks that are going through local streets. That's something that some of the items of the project are looking to do. So it's a really great, exciting project, and we're definitely happy to have more voices into that conversation.
It sounds like you and Gaby are going to be very busy in Wilmington over the next few years. I think that might be it in terms of questions that we want to talk about as a whole group. Susan, I would encourage you to go ahead and reach out to Chris directly with some of your local questions about the proposed projects in Wilmington. Arturo, do you have some thoughts?
Yeah, hi. Lastly, I just want to share some tips because, as we all know, we were all impacted by COVID. We still are, and a lot of we had to really rethink our engagement because everything went through Zoom. So, but we learned that meeting through Zoom, you could actually hold more meetings than you can in person, because with Zoom you could attend. You could join anywhere. You could be, I'm in a parking lot now, for example, but I'm not, just kidding. But one tip is help others use Zoom, like Spanish speakers of people of other languages who are not familiar with using the technology. That's one way of getting more people involved. Train others to use Zoom, have them be comfortable. That way they could start engaging with each other. And also creating other, using other applications on your smartphone, like the WhatsApp. That's an application through Facebook, and I know that works with communicating amongst promotoras in LA County and LA City. They use that app to communicate with each other about meetings taking place, where to attend certain groups, certain meetings, actions. So train others with social media. I think is very important, especially now how we see that this format could work.
Great, thank you. I know similar to that, Metro, when they were doing outreach for a bus lane project on La Brea, they held a virtual meeting, but then they had a mobile truck with laptops for folks that wanted to come to a physical location in the community and participate in a maybe they didn't have access to a home computer or stable internet. They were able to participate in the virtual meeting at a physical location provided by Metro, which I thought was pretty cool. Okay, maybe can go around to the panel. Any kind of closing thoughts or points that you wanted to make before we wrap up? Let's go in the same order we started with. Chris, you want to provide any closing remarks?
I just thank you everybody for your time and listening, and people like Gaby who get involved at that ground level and get things done. That's really how the most important work happens.
Thank you. Arturo?
Oh yeah, sorry about that. I just want to say thank you everyone for attending. Gaby, I think is a great inspiration to help motivate other residents to do the similar work, and just know that to have patience with these planning projects. They take a while, but you have to be consistent and transparent when you're talking to residents about having them engage, and know that it's not a quick fix, but it's a long-term goal.
Thank you. Gaby, any closing thoughts you want to leave our audience with?
Muchas gracias a todos por estar aquí. Gracias a LANI por la oportunidad de permitirme estar aquí como panelista. Y pues si tenemos el objetivo bien a donde queremos llegar, lo vamos a lograr. No importa quiénes somos, organizaciones, miembros de la comunidad y todo, pero si trabajamos juntos, vamos a lograr ese propósito. Gracias a todos y síganos. Está en nuestro grupo Wilmington, Calle Segura, Familias Sanas, que este grupo se hizo gracias de ese cruce decorativo. Se hicieron muchos proyectos aquí, como educar a promotores por Calle Segura. Yo soy educadora de Promotora. Sigan a LAWAC en sus páginas. Este sábado va a tener el 30 de abril su recaudación de fondos. Organizaciones sin fines de lucro necesitan de dinero para que nos sigan a nuestra comunidad dando las herramientas. Gracias a todos, LANI, muchas gracias. Gracias LGOT por la información y aquí nos veremos porque queremos trabajar juntos.
Great, thank you so much. Thank you to all of our panelists for the excellent conversation that we had and sharing your words of wisdom with our audience. And thank you to LANI for providing the space for us to have this dialogue. Francie, let me turn it back over to you for housekeeping and to close us out.
Thanks, Eric, and thank you, everyone. I'm just so grateful to these amazing panelists who brought us so much wisdom and so much inspiration about how we can do exactly what Gaby did by working together, public agency, local CBOs, community members, all working together. That's how it happens. And that's exactly what we saw today. So thank you guys all so much for taking the time to prepare and be here with us today. I want to also just thank again our sponsors, Metropolitan Water District and Emily Gabaletti and Chief Strategies for making this session possible for everyone. And if you're interested in learning more about accessory dwelling units and what is happening locally with those, both in terms of addressing our housing crisis and other impacts that ADUs can have for a community, then we hope you'll join us on May 19th. You can sign up for our newsletter, which is how most people find out about this forum sessions, on our website, which is lani.org. Very simple. So if you sign up for our newsletter, you'll find out about all the upcoming forum sessions, as well as lots of other great neighborhood improvement related content. And then finally, I just want to thank everyone who attended today. We really appreciate your commitment to making LA neighborhoods better, and we appreciate that you took time in your busy schedules to come and learn some more about pedestrian safety today. So thank you so much, everyone, and we look forward to seeing you again next time. Have a great afternoon, everybody. Thank you.